Hello, I'm William Sanchez, and this is the Philosophical Rebellion Substack. Today, I'm going to talk about what I view to be some very important changes needed in the American tax system, because I think Americans are paying way too much in taxes. So what I would do is integrate the capital gains tax bracket, the ordinary income tax bracket, and the corporate tax bracket all into a single tax system. And if we do that to force those paying capital gains taxes, and especially force corporations to pay the same tax rate as ordinary workers, then we could basically totally eliminate the tax burden on most ordinary workers in America. Unfortunately, the way it happens right now is multi-billion-dollar corporations like Tesla, who have made billions of dollars in the past few years, actually get tax rebates. And in 2020, there were 55 of America's largest and most profitable corporations that didn't pay any income taxes at all. Many corporations like Amazon get tax rebates year after year after making billions of dollars in profit. And then those corporations go and pay outrageous levels of compensation to their CEOs and shareholders who do not take ordinary income. So the money that the shareholders and executives make is actually taxed at the capital gains tax rate instead of the income tax rate, meaning that they are exempted from taxes up until the first $40,000. Then they pay 15%, then they pay 20%. So just by merging the capital gains, corporate, and ordinary income tax brackets, we could eliminate taxes for most workers in America. So I wrote up what I think that would actually look like. $0 through $20,000 earned would be taxed at a 0% tax rate. $20,000 to $40,000 would be taxed at a 5% tax rate. $40,000 to $90,000 would be taxed at a 10% tax rate. $90,000 to $180,000, 15%. $180,000 to $360,000, 20%. $360,000 to $720,000, 25%. $720,000 to $1.4 million, 30%. Then $1.4 million to $100 million, 32%. Then $100 million to $1 billion, 34%. Then a 36% tax rate for all income made over $1 billion. And that tax bracket would lower the tax burden on most of America while only asking corporations and the ultra-wealthy to pay a slightly higher tax rate. But then the question actually becomes, how much money does the American government actually need to take in? And that's where I would push for complete transparency in the American tax system. Every year, my credit card tracks how much money I spend throughout the year and what I spent that money on. Then it shows me a very simple graph where I could find out where I spent my money. And that's something every single taxpayer should be entitled to when it comes to the money the government is spending on our behalf. So I think that every taxpayer should be given a detailed breakdown of where every dollar they paid in taxes is being spent by the government. So we need a tax system that is truly progressive and taxes those at the highest income thresholds at the highest rate, and those on the lowest end of the income spectrum at the lowest rate. And in addition to that, we need complete transparency into how all tax revenue is actually spent. Then thirdly, we need to minimize the amount of tax revenue the American government actually needs to take in. And the best way to actually accomplish that goal is ending the waste, fraud, and abuse in the American government. And there are two very significant forms of waste, fraud, and abuse going on in the government right now. And that comes in our healthcare system and in our military. Our healthcare system is horribly designed so that Medicare is not legally allowed to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical manufacturers, meaning that those pharma companies have bought our government and written into our laws that the free market is no longer a thing when it comes to Medicare. And in the pursuit of lowering healthcare costs for American consumers, Bernie Sanders has been subpoenaing CEOs of pharmaceutical companies because sometimes in America, a drug like Ozempic could be manufactured for $5 a month. But the price tag for that drug to consumers is $1,000 a month. And because the American government does not regulate prices but actually allows pharmaceutical companies to set their own prices, it has led to the American people paying the highest prices in the entire world for these medications. Another one of those drugs is called Eliquis, and Bernie Sanders asked the CEO, "Will you commit at Bristol Myers Squibb to reduce the list price of Eliquis in the United States to the price that you charge in Canada where you make a profit?" Which the CEO refused. And Bernie Sanders attributed the refusal to Bristol Myers Squibb making $34.6 billion selling Eliquis in the United States at the grossly inflated price, compared to just $22.5 billion made selling Eliquis in the rest of the world combined. And high prices for American consumers is not a bug in our healthcare system. It is the entire design of the healthcare system. So many people are calling Bernie Sanders a radical socialist trying to enforce authoritarian government price setting. And the same people criticizing Bernie Sanders as an authoritarian are actually themselves attempting to enforce authoritarian price setting, with the price setters being corporations instead of government. So inside of America, there's a very big debate between even allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And it would save American taxpayers tens of billions to hundreds of billions of dollars every year just getting rid of the excess profit margins that pharmaceutical companies make off of the American healthcare system. But that same type of price gouging pharma companies engage in is widespread in the entire American economy, especially in our military, where defense contractors pocket billions of dollars a year all by selling the American military goods at grossly inflated prices. And that is with the money that our military can even track. The Pentagon has failed 6 audits in a row and typically loses track of at least 1/3 of the funding that we send them. So we send the military about $900 billion a year, and they lose $300 billion not knowing where it went. So I think every time the Pentagon fails an audit, the American military budget should be cut by an equivalent amount that they lost track of. So the 3 ways I think America needs to fix our tax system is to integrate all forms of income into a single tax bracket and create complete transparency in how all American tax revenue is spent. Then minimize how much tax revenue actually needs to be brought in by the American government by getting rid of the actual waste, fraud, and abuse in the American government. But America needs way more economic reforms beyond just fixing our tax system. And Joe Biden, with Bidenomics, has actually made some progress in that regard. Corporations now have a 15% minimum tax rate under Joe Biden. So he has increased it from Donald Trump's 0% tax rate or even tax rebates to a 15% minimum tax for America's largest corporations. And under Joe Biden's leadership, America has achieved historic lows in unemployment that have been sustained for most of his presidency. And in terms of global inflation, America has actually been handling it way better than most of the world, not even breaking into the top 100 nations in terms of the highest inflation rate. But Americans are still very upset with the inflation that they have experienced. Unfortunately, they blame Joe Biden instead of the true culprits. The single biggest cause of inflation inside of the United States over the last few years has actually been corporations raising their prices unnecessarily in order to make a higher profit margin than they had before. So although some aspects of a business would experience inflation, the prices to consumers would be raised at a rate far beyond any inflation the actual business would experience. And all of that would end up going to higher profit margins, which would then be sent to shareholders or paid out to corporate executives. So if the American people should be mad at anything for inflation, It is the greed of the elites. And that's actually a really big issue inside of America right now, because the elites have way too much power over our government, and they have manipulated our economic policy so that they earn far more than they deserve at the expense of the working class. So since the rise of trickle-down economics, the American economy has redistributed $50 trillion away from the working class to the 1%. And that has taken the form of stagnating wages for workers, with rapidly increasing CEO compensation and dividends sent to shareholders. So not only does the working class need to pay less in taxes compared to the elites, they also deserve to be earning much more in income compared to the elites. Because right now, we have 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. So if you add up what Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Larry Ellison possess, it is more wealth than the bottom 165 million Americans possess. And if you take into account the entire 1%, they own more wealth than the bottom 90% of American society. So my solution to that would be a one-time undoing the effects of trickle-down economics wealth tax, which would only affect those in the top 5% of the American economy. So you would tax people like the Waltons, the richest family in America who made their wealth off of Walmart stock, or Jeff Bezos, who was the richest person in America, all off of Amazon stock, or Elon Musk, who was also the richest person in America based on Tesla stock. So what the undoing trickle-down tax would do was take the money given to the 1% through unfair economic practices and redistribute it to the working class who actually earned it in the first place. So instead of having the 1% sitting on massive fortunes that only they benefit from, I believe in widespread societal wealth instead of the extreme fortunes of very few. So I would prefer every member of the bottom 95% of American society to receive a personalized brokerage account with a few $1,000s worth of stock taxed from the elites. And the inspiration for this idea actually comes from 3 people: Abraham Lincoln, Adam Smith, and Theodore Roosevelt. Abraham Lincoln said, "It has so happened in all ages of the world that some have labored and others have, without labor, enjoyed a large proportion of the fruits. This is wrong and should not continue. To each laborer, the whole product of his labor, or as nearly as possible, is a worthy object of any good government." Adam Smith said, "All for ourselves and nothing for other people seems in every age of the world to have been the vile maxim of the masters of mankind." And Theodore Roosevelt said, "In every struggle for human betterment, one of the main objects, and often the only object, has been to achieve in large measure equality of opportunity. At many stages in the advance of humanity, this conflict between the men who possess more than they have earned and the men who have earned more than they possess is the central condition of progress." And today, the struggle Abraham Lincoln, Adam Smith, and Theodore Roosevelt were all referring to is the same struggle we inherit between the elites and everybody else. And for the last 50 years, the elites have been dominating in class warfare. So it is about time for the working class to unify and represent their own economic interests against those of the elites. Because the American economy is horribly corrupted, and people out there are stealing wealth from you. But it is not immigrants, and it is not people on welfare struggling to afford basic needs. The actual parasites in the American economy are the 1%. The CEOs and shareholders that get paid far more than they actually earn at the expense of the working class. And unfortunately, at this point, the elites have tremendous power over both parties inside of the United States. But the elitist control over the Republican Party is far worse than that of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders is by far the most pro-labor politician in the entire American government. and he has pulled the Democratic Party much closer to good economic policy. Unfortunately, the Republican Party of today is completely bought and owned by the elites, and that is the party that Mitch McConnell has been leading and creating for the past few decades. And although the Republican Party attempts to appeal to the working class, their actual policy priorities are in the economic interest of the elites at the expense of the working class. So, in modern America, the eternal battle between those who possess more than they have earned versus those who have earned more than they possess looks like the battle between the working class versus the shareholder class. And I think Americans need to ask themselves, does the Walton family deserve to be worth over $240 billion, mostly from Walmart stock, while their workers made less than a living wage? Did Jeff Bezos deserve to be the wealthiest man in the world for a few years when Amazon workers were relying on welfare? Does Elon Musk deserve to make 40,000 times the average Tesla employee's compensation? Should Warren Buffett pay a lower tax rate than his secretary? To me, the obvious answer to those questions is no. But aside from Bernie Sanders, there are very few members of Congress that agree with my perspective. And that is why we need Bernie Sanders' Saving American Democracy constitutional amendment. Because right now, and for the last several decades, the elites, the big businesses, the billionaires, the 1% have had way too much power over the American government. And they have corrupted our economic policy in their favor. So not only do we need to completely reevaluate our economic laws, we also need to end the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics, which is a recommendation that comes directly from the radical socialist Theodore Roosevelt. So when a lot of the mainstream media discusses socialism restricting economic freedom, who are they talking about it restricting freedom for? Because if it restricts the freedom of big businesses to price gouge the American consumer, or monopolize a market, or pollute the environment, I am all for restricting those freedoms. The elites have had way too much freedom to corrupt the American economy. But socialism is actually a pro-freedom economic ideology. It just represents the freedom of the working class. And socialism would mean radically expanding the economic freedom of all members of the working class at the expense of the economic freedom of the 1%. And that's why socialism is so vilified today by the economic elites, because socialism is the biggest threat to their dominance in the American economy and their power over the American government. And that's why socialism is a scare word used by the economic elites. Because if they accurately represented the debate, then working class capitalism wins every time. And Bernie Sanders' socialism is actually much more in line with what Adam Smith described and what the founders of the Constitution aspired to create than the horribly corrupted trickle-down economic ideology has ever been. Trickle-down economics is a horribly corrupted version of capitalism, and ending the era of trickle-down economics in American policy and in American culture is one of the most important changes that needs to happen today. And that could start with the 99% realizing that socialism is nothing more than a scare word used to describe the economic interests of the working class. So don't let the economic elites fool you into supporting policy which represents their own freedom and not yours. Instead, it is time for the working class to finally unify, and once and for all, put an end to the vile maxim of the masters of mankind.